Okay, we are ready to start this next video on photosynthesis. Okay, with photosynthesis, we want to go back and pick up the organelle, the chloroplast, because we know chloroplast is the site for photosynthesis, especially in our plant cells. So, one of the things that I want to mention, actually, I'll just mention it a little bit later. Let's talk about some of the plant cell differences, plant cell versus an animal cell, some of the things that we see that would be different. We know that plant cells, they have a cell wall. Um, Animal cells did not have a cell wall. They have a large central vacuole, so they have this huge bubble that you see here. And then they also lack centrioles. And they also have plastids, okay? Chloroplasts, which is what we're going to talk about. That's a plastid. It's a type of plastid, but we'll talk about more than one type of plastid that plant cells actually have. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, let's talk about the cell wall. The cell wall we know is rigid. It functions to help support the plant. Um, so in other words, it's responsible for bringing about the stiffness that you see in plant cell walls. There are a couple of regions that we need to talk about: the plasmodesmata and the middle lamella. The plasmodesmata, those are the channels that occur between both plants. The middle lamella is the area that is going to help hold the adjacent cells together. So let's look at the plasmodesmata a little bit closer. If you look at these adjacent cells, you'll see these little canal-like structures between each. These canal-like structures is what's going to allow for communication, nutrients, etc., to move from the outermost edge of the plant to the innermost edge, and then from the innermost to the outermost. So it's a canal-like structure that's formed during the production of the cell wall. It's lined by the plasma membrane, so you'll see the plasma membrane lining the wall. And then again, it allows for molecular communication. So from cell to cell, any nutrients, etc., that's how they're going to move from the innermost to the outermost, or from the outermost to the innermost. The middle lamella, composed of pectin type materials. So this is what's going to glue those adjacent cells together. So it cements adjacent cells together. So those glues would be found in between each cell. The large central vacuole, this big huge bubble, we know it occupies approximately 90% of the cell. If the function of it is to hold, extra materials, and it can also hold waste. There may be some toxins in there. So we know that this is a fluid-filled chamber. This outermost membrane is called the tonoplast. So again, primary function, storage of reserve materials and waste products, surrounded by that membrane called the tonoplast. And the central vacuole also is responsible for that outward push, turgor pressure, pushing against the cell membrane, okay? Fluid pushing against that cell membrane, that outward push. When your plants are wilted, you can say that your plants have lost their turgor pressure. So you need to water your plants in order to restore that turgor. Plant cells, we said, like centrioles. So even though the centrioles aren't present, and if you remember, we said centrioles' job was to create spindle fibers, they still create those spindle fibers, even though the centrioles are not present. And remember, the spindle fiber's job was to help separate chromosomes. Plastids. We've got 3 different type of plastids that we want to talk about that plant cells have or possess. 3 types of plastids found in plant cells: the chloroplasts, which are the green plastids. These are the ones that are found in the leaves of the plant. We know, so therefore this is going to be the site for photosynthesis. The site for photosynthesis. The leucoplasts, these are the white plastids. These are function as energy storage organelles. So we know the place that we would find leucoplasts, for example, is in a potato, a root or a fruit. Okay. And then finally, the chromoplasts. The chromoplasts, these are what we refer to as our colored plastids. So they have many different colors. So all those beautiful colors that you see in the brightly colored parts of plants and fruits and flowers. This is the pigment storage organelle that's going to be responsible for all those beautiful colors that we see. Okay. So let's look at chloroplast structure. If we looked at the chloroplast, we can see that the chloroplast is nice and smooth. So that outer membrane is smooth. But the inner membrane is folded into these stacks of corn-like sacs that we refer to as grana. If we're looking at them individually, we say thylakoid, but the whole stack would be grana. Okay, so it's a double membrane structure. We say it again, the outer membrane, very smooth, inner membrane folded into these stacks of flattened sacs that we call grana. Individually, we call them thylakoids. So the whole stack. Okay, that's grana. Sorry. The fluid field. The fluid that's surrounding these stacks of corn-like sacs. In that fluid filled space, we want to call that the stroma. Okay, so in the stroma is where a reaction will take place. In the thylakoid membrane is where the other reaction will take place. So, photosynthetic pigment, the only one that we're going to talk about is chlorophyll. We're not going to get into all the other photosynthetic pigments. We'll talk about 2 reactions: a light dependent or simply light reaction, and then the dark reaction or light independent reaction. So your Calvin cycle reactions are also called the light independent and also called the dark reaction. So again, Calvin cycle reactions can be referred to as the light independent reaction, and it also can be referred to as the dark reaction, RXN. All right, so we said chloroplasts were the site for photosynthesis in cells. So if we looked at the summary equation, can anybody tell me what that summary equation looks like? Can you remember what that summary equation looks like? Right. It says we're going to take in some carbon dioxide through the tiny openings in the leaf called the stomata. And then we're going to absorb some water from the root system and with the help of solar energy. So we know this is an endergonic reaction because we need some solar energy. So And then it says that will yield us lots of glucose and oxygen for our cells so that we can stay alive. Amen. All right, so the process by which green plants, which are the producers, and because they can harvest those organic materials and create their own food as well as food for us, we refer to them as autotrophs. Autotrophs. And because they can take those raw materials, carbon dioxide, in from the stomata, the water from the root system, and utilizing the solar energy, chlorophyll absorbs the solar energy, and they can convert those molecules into glucose, which is a food molecule that gives us chemical energy, and also oxygen gas. Okay, all organisms use those molecules, those organic molecules, meaning the glucose, the oxygen gas is actually an inorganic molecule, but we use the molecule glucose as a source of chemical energy. It's our nutrient source. So therefore, since all other organisms use those that glucose molecule as a source of energy, that makes us the heterotroph. So we're the consumers. So we are the heterotrophs. Okay. Again, we mentioned oxygen. Oxygen is a byproduct of that reaction. Oxygen helps keep all of our cells alive. Oxygen also is responsible for fueling cell respiration, and oxygen is also a part of our ozone layer. It helps protect us from the harmful UV rays from the sun. But if we are not taking care of our planet, if we're using, you know, just letting our car sit and run in the yard, for example, or we run around with, 4 and 5 cars, if we're just, being irresponsible people that live on the planet, then we end up depleting that ozone layer, and we can suffer from probably being exposed to more radiation. So again, forming that ozone seal to protect us from those harmful UV rays. Okay, we haven't talked about cellular respiration, but one of the things that we'll find out with both of these is that it's easier to figure out what's going on in cellular respiration. It's easier to figure out what's going on in photosynthesis if we look at their reaction groups. Okay, so they have a complex series of reactions. Remember, we kind of walked through a piece of a metabolic pathway for cellular respiration. But so there's many reactions that gets us to the final product. If you look at the equation, you think it's bam, bam, and that's it. But there's a lot of in between steps. We're not going to cover every single thing, but we're going to hit the highlights. All right, so for us, we know that there's 2 reaction groups. There was a light dependent reaction, and then there's a dark reaction, or Calvin cycle reaction, or the light independent reaction. So again, the light dependent, what does that word mean? Light dependent. Absolutely, you guessed correctly. Light dependent means you gotta have light. Light independent means what? Correct. You don't have to have light in order for that particular reaction to proceed. So let's dig in just a little further. Okay, so leaves. Let's look at the leaves before we go in and these areas within the chloroplast before we actually go and into the details that I want you to know. Okay, the leaves, we know that they contain mesophyll tissue, and so that means it's a specialized tissue, and the reason why it's specialized is because it houses the mitochondria. So the mitochondria the chloroplast. So we know that this is going to be an area that's specialized for photosynthesis because the chloroplast is present. Straighten this out. But anyway, okay. Plants. Um, Continued, we know that carbon dioxide, okay. Carbon dioxide enters the leaf through the tiny opening within the leaves called the stomata. Water, we said, diffused from the roots, and chlorophyll is housed as well as other pigments within the thylakoid membrane. So we know that the chlorophyll is capable of absorbing solar energy. So if you know that chlorophyll is capable of absorbing solar energy, which reaction of the two groups would it be involved in? If you said light reaction, that is absolutely correct. Because if chlorophyll absorbs solar energy is what? Light. So you know which reaction this is going to deal with. This is going to be the light reaction. We know where the light reaction is going to take place. Where? In the thylakoid membrane, because that's where the chlorophyll is located. Easy peasy. So think of this way, and you won't ever get lost on the test, because chlorophyll is inside of the thylakoid. Therefore, you know the light reaction must take place here. Okay, so I will stop right there, and we'll pick up in just a little while and with the rest of the specifics of the two reactions.